As of starting this recording, it is 7:56 p.m., so it's an early one. And we're going to be doing a video, a full video on the Russian sleep experiment. So this is going to be a little different than our normal videos because I usually do 3 to 4 stories, depending on the length and how much information is in each. But today, I was requested to do the Russian sleep experiment. So we're just going to jump right in and see what this is. I know a little bit about it. I know that there was a Russian sleep experiment, as it's called, and people were locked in rooms. These were Russian soldiers, I believe, during the Cold War, but don't quote me. And there was gas pumped into the room that caused these people to stay awake, so they never had to sleep. And the experiment was to test if they could make their soldiers need no sleep. Could they be able to make like a super soldier, basically, like a soldier that never needed to sleep? And if they didn't need to sleep, they would have an advantage over the war, and so on and so forth. So they pumped this gas into the room, and we're going to be talking about it. I'm very excited for this one because, unlike the other ones, this is going to be lengthy. So I'm going to try and find a website that has a lot of information on it. So give me a second while I find it, and I'll cut right to where I find the right website. Alright, we are back, and I found a pretty lengthy one. It says it's about 8 minutes, and this is about uh, the Russian sleep experiment. So I do know a decent amount about this. So as we go, I'm just going to add in my own little touches, or if I have any more information at the end, I'm going to add it in, but we're going to read this, and we're going to have some fun. So let's jump right into it and start reading. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on, but no bedding, running water and toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. So I want to correct myself. This was during World War II and not the Cold War. Also, I would like to point out, this is not, I mean, it's a conspiracy theory. So it could be true, but it's not like 100%. Like it wasn't like written in books and everything. So this may not have happened, but it's a conspiracy theory. So I also want to point out, I'm not sure if it'll go more in depth, but I'd like to just say that these were prisoners. So I believe most of them, they deserted, or they were like friendly fire, and instead of them being executed, they put them in this, and they basically said, if you do this experiment for us, we're going to let you go free. So anyway, I just wanted to add that in there. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised, falsely, that they would be freed if they submitted to the tests, and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were, and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. Let me move my cursor out of the way. My apologies. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering into the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it, or rather didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared pages after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispers into the microphones. So I want to point out that wasn't very. It didn't explain it very much. But if you don't understand what happened, there was kind of like in an interrogation room. There was glass that the people couldn't see in and see the people that were watching them, the scientists. But the scientists could see everyone. And what they ended up doing was all the people in there. After the man was screamed enough to tear his vocal cords, they took the books apart, like ripped all the pages out, and plastered it onto the window, onto the one-sided glass, basically sticking it on there with feces and I believe blood as well. Um, so yeah, that's basically a recap. It's nasty, but that's what they did. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people could consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise, which would mean that with the amount of oxygen being taken in, it would assume that all of them were heavily breathing. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provide any response from the captives they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice respond, "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military force funding the research. Unable to provoke any more responses using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphone began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that any of them in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subject's thighs and chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth, as the researchers initially thought. Which would mean, if you don't understand that they basically tore their own skin and muscle off with their own fingernails. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted, again indicating that they basically tore all of their flesh off. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscle attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out all the eviscerated, but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that had been ripped off and eaten over the course of days. So I want to point out, I have, just briefly, I'd like to say, I've read a lot of stuff about how not sleeping can mess with you. And being someone that doesn't sleep very much, obviously, I usually make these videos late. I'm making this one earlier because I did a lot today, so I'm kind of tired. But I usually do these pretty late. And reading this kind of freaks me out because obviously I've never been up for 15 days. But I've been up for, like 2 or 3 days straight. And you get nauseated after that long. And just to think, after 3 days, I wanted to die. Like, you can't stay up after, I mean, I couldn't stay up after 3 days. But you could see when you sleep, your brain goes through cycles of like chilling out and kind of cycling all the information that you have, and it's apparent that these people, in the beginning of being in there, they were talking about all their stresses and all the problems they were having, most likely because their brain couldn't cycle it in sleep. Your brain does so much while you sleep, and they didn't have that luxury. So because of not being able to do that, at a certain point, their bodies just couldn't handle all the stress, and they, I guess they ripped their own flesh off and ate it. That's, I mean, wow. It's kind of crazy to me. Anyway, I'm gonna continue. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives if you count one that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. That would be the one that I believe was basically eaten, like his legs and arms and everything, like pieces of him were torn out. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arms of one doctor. When heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for almost 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach, and just repeating the word "more" over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell asleep. Or fell silent, my apologies. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begged for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative that they had given him to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist down as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 5 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force of his own muscle had exerted on them. So just kind of looking back at that, because that's kind of a lot to take in, it almost seems that these people are numbed. It almost seems that in their struggle, well, not even in their struggle, in not being able to sleep, it's almost that their bodies shut down. And, I mean, I guess what I can compare it to is every single human in the world. Imagine biting a carrot. That is how easy it is to bite your finger. But even if you try right now, it is impossible to bite your finger off, because your brain is smart enough to understand that it's stupid. You don't want to bite your own finger off. And it's those impulses that your brain gives you that allows you to not bite your finger off. But it seems like for them, their brain has lost this impulse. And unlike one person where if you pull hard enough, you can kind of feel your bones kind of giving, so you stop. These people don't understand that, and they don't feel that. So it's almost as if they don't feel pain. And it's also interesting, all they want is to not go to sleep. All they want is to stay awake, even though they are ripping their bones off, or, I mean, ripping their muscles off and breaking their bones. All they want is to stay awake. And that's just, It's mind-boggling. It's very interesting. But yeah, let's continue. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming, his vocal cords destroyed. He was not able to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when somebody suggested reluctantly they try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. Also, another interesting thing, it doesn't seem they react to pain. He went through a whole 6-hour surgery and didn't react at all, so it's almost as if sleep, if you don't sleep, your nerves shut down, just like everything else in your body. The surgeons presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeons and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeons had a pen and pad fetched so that the patient could write his message. It was a simple, "Keep cutting." The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation, which means that they were injected with something that temporarily paralyzed them. The surgeons found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their systems in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given gas again. The only one response was given: "I must remain awake." So, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, but this is really interesting. The only thing I'm going to say about that is it almost seems like, because of what he said, ripping their guts out and tearing their muscles out, it was a form of trying to stay awake, and it's kind of like pinching yourself to stay awake. It's inflicting pain so that you don't fall asleep. Even with the gas, it seems it was almost impossible for them to fall or to stay awake. But in order to stay awake, they tore their own guts out and everything. I just find that to be I don't even know the word. It's just I always come back to the word interesting, which I find when I look back on my videos. I say that a lot, but it's that's really the word that pops up whenever I think about this. Okay. All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, a former KGB agent, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back onto the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed back into the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor that had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all 3 stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back onto the gas. It was obvious at this point all 3 were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. So I wanted to point out that's exactly what I said. It seems that they were all putting up a great struggle to stay awake, so they don't want to fall asleep. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might, first left, then right, then left again, for something to focus on, again to stay awake. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Again, interesting, he wanted to stay awake. Having been the first to be wired for EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brainwaves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering from brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on papers scrolling out onto the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of a deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time, and his heart simultaneously stopped. Wow, I don't really have much to say about that. I just want to keep reading. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flat lines as one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed the gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed, and remained member of the medical and research team fled the room. I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you, he screamed at the man strapped on the table. What are you? He demanded. I must know. The subject smiled. Have you forgotten so easily? The subject asked. We are you. We are the madness that lurks within all of you, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralyze when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread. The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, so nearly free. Oh my god. Okay, so I didn't know. I've never read this. I've only watched a video on it. There's actually a movie. If you want, I'll link in the description. There's a movie that you can watch about this. I'll also give credit to the person who created that because it's a really good movie. But just as a warning, it is very graphic. Um, that's just so much to take in at one moment. Um, so that's the Russian sleep experiment. I'm not gonna, there's really no more to read, so I'm just gonna kind of comment on a few things and then I'll end the video. So, to start out, like I said before, it seemed that all of these subjects were talking about things that your brain would usually kind of take in and everything at night while you're sleeping. So, for instance, for me personally, when you go through a breakup, you're put on so much strain that your body almost feels like it can't handle it. If you feel that kind of weight in your chest, that's kind of what we're talking about here, or at least that's what I'm talking about. And when you sleep, unbeknownst to you, your body kind of takes in all this information that you can't really process yourself, or that kind of makes you break down and sort of, I guess, processes it in a way that allows you to absorb it in a more healthy way. And that is sometimes why if you're crying, you immediately fall asleep, because if you're crying, you're in so much stress that you need to just go to bed. Or kind of, if something crazy happens, like let's just say you get jumped by a dog, right, and you get really scared, you pass out because your brain, it goes into a defensive mode. So sleeping is sort of this defensive mode that your brain goes into in order to process things and make sure that you're okay. And ripping this ability from these people, it completely tore them apart. Um, but I just don't understand. The one thing I don't understand, which kind of makes sense, is if you've been stuck awake for 15 days, just kind of imagine the most tired you've ever been. And imagine timing that by like a million, okay? So you've been awake for 15 days, and all they wanted was to stay awake. They didn't want to go to bed, they didn't want to lie down, all they wanted was to stay awake. And they went to the point of ripping their own muscles out, tearing their guts out, eating themselves, all in order to stay awake. And for what reason, we really don't know. And towards the end of this, some of the quotes that they were saying, kind of like this doctor saying, "What are you?" And the subject smiled and he said, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you, begging to be freed at every moment in your deepest animal mind." So it seems that they have, I don't know, unlocked something or felt something that, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I don't understand what they're trying to say here, but I'm just kind of trying to, I mean, I'm guessing everyone, if you've made it this far, you probably don't understand what happened, but I'm just trying to kind of verbalize how I feel about it. If you have any ideas about what this means, or what the quotes mean, what happens with their brain, I guess put it down in the comments below. But that's all. I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm fairly happy with this. This was a good read, and I'm happy with the length. And I'm happy that I got to narrate a lot of it. It was a really good story. The Russian Sleep Experiment. It was written by someone anonymous, but it is on. What's the name of this? It is on CreepyPasta. It's on CreepyPasta. Check out CreepyPasta. It has a lot of really good stories. This is one of the this is a really popular one. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I personally enjoyed that a lot, and I will see you guys in the next video.